don't have anything except a Bible. So if you can tell me where we're going to be, then I'll just find it.
Okay, so we're going to be starting in just a moment around Leviticus 27, verse 9.
Okay, thank you.
And we do have, I don't know if it's been shared with you, a location where we usually have a lot of supplementary material. And let me find and just post and remind folks what that link is.
Thank you.
No worries.
And Rabbi, I really appreciated your email with the command that we will finish.
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Me too.
I felt the same way.
Oh, good.
If I were a wagering person, Rabbi, I would take the over.
Yeah, but we're not complaining about it though, right? Nobody's saying, oh, well, let's get this over. It's just that we're excited about moving forward,
Yeah, right.
right?
In the law, shall means maybe, and maybe means probably not.
Starting over is very appropriate for the times we're going through.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so,
we only have about 30 years or so to get to the next time starting over. So, everyone's got to stay healthy.
And we better recruit
all right,
some
let's
more
start with a blessing for our study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. I'll begin with a very big thank you to Lisa Kaiser for filling in last week. I really appreciated the fact that I was able to be with my family and focus on them and not have to tell them, oh, I have to take a break during these specific times. So that was really helpful and much appreciated.
Happy to help.
Thank you. For those of you who are on our regular distro list, yes, you saw the plan, which is that between today and next week, we are going to finish the book of Leviticus. There's not that much more. We're going to all try to focus and control ourselves. And then, then we're going to take 2 weeks off from formal study. And however, I will leave this link live. So if people want to check in and kibitz and schmooze and catch up and just see another human face, you will have the opportunity to do that. And then I believe the date is August 23rd, which is when we would normally be starting our Torah study for the year, as religious school also launches for the new year. We're going to be starting with Genesis 1:1. So it really is very, very exciting, something that we've all been looking forward to. And I would like to say I appreciate everyone's cooperation in being willing to engage in studying the book of Leviticus, which we're all aware is very challenging, and it's been challenging to make meaning out of some of this material. And with everyone's input and willing spirit, I think we've been able to do that, and it's something we should all be proud of. Owen.
I think you have made this, you have illuminated this in a way that I would never have thought to think about in the way that you've kind of walked us through this. So it has taken a while, but for me, it has been very, very worth it.
Thank you so much.
I'm really glad we did this.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been a good challenge for me as well. And for those of you who are new, if you go back to that URL that I just posted, you can see all of the supplementary material that we've had for the entire book of Leviticus that has brought us to this moment. Lisa, you want to just say, please, 2 or 3 sentences about where we were last week, and so we'll know where we are right now?
Yeah, sure. So I know we did talk a little bit about verses 9 through 12, and
good.
bringing various animals to the priest, whether the animal was kosher or not. I don't think we started to talk about consecrating the house.
So you read Good Noticing?
We did.
Good. So Yes, for those of you, this is a source that we don't typically look at. So this may have been new to some of you. This book, good noticing. It was what we refer to as a Festschrift, a compilation of teaching given in honor of a particular teacher. So Rabbi Sheila Peltz Weinberg is a founding teacher in the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. And when she got ready to retire from that position, her students over many, many years were invited to write a meditative commentary on a parsha and also on a holiday. So that's where that was drawn from. And you read the Women's Torah commentary as well. Good. So let's pick up then with verse 10. We're in 27:10. And we're talking about animals that are being brought for sacrifice. One may not exchange or substitute another for it, either good for bad or bad for good. If one does substitute one animal for another, the thing vowed and its substitute shall both be holy. So kind of interesting, you know, when you make a gift, it's a permanent gift. You don't have the opportunity to say, oh, never mind, I want to exchange that gift. And once something has been dedicated to the sanctuary, it now has a level of holiness associated with it, such that it can never be made unholy or impure. And I think about the physical Torah scroll, which is so holy that it is beyond defilement or desecration. We always want to treat the Torah as a very sacred object, but if you were eating a BLT over an open Torah scroll and some of the bacon fell onto the Torah, the Torah has not become less holy because of that. It's so holy that it's like a Teflon for impurity. It just
That is so good
Does
to know.
the bacon
I'm
then
so glad to
become
hear
kosher?
that.
It's interesting because as we're getting ready for this new world of the virtual high holidays, we're planning to share the Torah scroll. Those who are going to be reading Torah and having aliyot virtually during the high holidays, we're going to actually let them borrow the physical Torah scroll. And one thing that Debbie Blinn and the clergy have been doing behind the scenes is developing guidelines. Okay, if you're bringing the Torah into your home, what does that mean? How should you be treating it? And you know, we do of course request that people not have any food or drink anywhere near it. But the point is that there is such a thing as permanent holiness, and that's what the Torah is saying about these particular sacrifices, that they are permanently holy even if they get exchanged. 11 going on. Maybe somebody could read 11, 12, and 13. They seem to be grouped together. Yes, Mariah. Yeah.
The vow concerns any impure animal that may not be brought as an offering to the Lord. The animal shall be presented before the priest, and the priest shall assess it, whether high or low. Whatever the assessment is set by the priest shall stand. And if he wishes to redeem it, he must add 1/5 to its assessment.
Mm-hmm. So it kind of begs the question of why would you be bringing an impure animal to give over to the temple? And I guess the idea is that even if it's not kosher to be sacrificed, the priest can sell it and use that money to support the operations of the Mishkan. And again, once it's pledged, the priest is in charge. The priest gets to decide what that animal is worth. So I guess it's sort of like what tax donation you're going to get for that animal. And if you decide you want it back, you have to pay a 20% service restocking charge. Just a restocking charge for that animal if you decide you want it back.
Restocking.
Yeah, right. Restocking is 20%. So it's kind of like today people donate used cars to the synagogue. Once you donate the synagogue to the used car, you can't say, well, I think that car is worth $3,000 and that's what it is. Whatever Debbie Blinn tells you that car is worth that we can get for it, that's what it is. You don't get a say in that once the donation has been made. Part of the issue is if you make that donation and then you want it back, the synagogue or the mishkan, they've already included that donation in their budget. So now the budget is taking a hit, and you have to compensate for that loss. So when and why did Jews stop calling their leaders priests? Up until the destruction of the Second Temple, there were both priests and rabbis. So priests ended, the concept of a priest ended when there was no longer a sacrificial system. And that was in the year 70 CE, the destruction of the Second Temple. So you had both levels of administration functioning, the temple and then the Sanhedrin. So you had rabbis and priests. And there are those who would argue, as we've discussed throughout Leviticus, who would say that the idea of animal sacrifice as the way of worship by the end of the 1st century CE was already becoming somewhat of an embarrassment. And that if the temple had not been destroyed and therefore sacrifices had not been ended, that the community might have really had a challenge to figure out how we're going to move beyond what really was an ancient form of worship, and how do you stop something that's been going on for thousands of years as a primary function of religious life, to end the sacrificial system. So it does kind of beg the question of a silver lining in the destruction of the temple. As tragic of an event as that was, it did bring to a halt animal sacrifice as the way of worship. And most of us, I think, are probably glad that ended and not looking forward to it beginning again. So so don't make a pledge to the temple and then renege on it, is basically the takeaway lesson there. What if you want to consecrate your house? So now we've got 14 and 15. Who can read for us those verses?
I can. If anyone consecrates his house to the Lord, the priest shall assess it, whether high or low, as the priest assesses it, so it shall stand. And if he who has consecrated his house wishes to redeem it, must add 1/5 to the sum at which it was assessed, and it shall be his.
There you go. So the same basic concept, 20% surcharge for taking back your donations. Anybody happen to have Zelig Pliskin's commentary on page 304? Yeah, Steve?
Yes, I have it.
Bless you. Would you please read that for us?
The act in an elevated manner at home?
Yes.
Okay. The Kotzker Rebbe commented on this verse, a person who sanctifies his house. When a person is involved in spiritual matters, it is relatively easy for him to do so in a sanctified state. But true holiness is when a person sanctifies the seemingly mundane daily activities of running his house. When one behaves in an elevated manner in his own house, he is truly a holy person. Torah ideals and principles are not only for when one is in a yeshiva or synagogue. Rather, Torah principles and values apply to all areas of our lives. At home, one has many opportunities for acts of kindness to one's own family. Also, behaving properly towards members of one's own family at home is frequently more difficult than behaving properly toward strangers. But the more difficult it is to apply Torah principles, the greater the reward. The more sanctified your behavior at home, the greater you become.
So beautiful and inspiring. So it's easy to be religious when you're sitting with talis and tefillin on in shul. But it's really the behavior in the parking lot that is the most telling. You know, people come and everybody is, you know, all lightness and sweetness and kindness inside the sanctuary. And then, you know, when people are stepping over each other and honking at each other and fighting to get out, that's the true test. And it's interesting what he says, even more so in your own house. How much more often are we more kind to strangers than we are to our own family members? And the idea is how you behave at home to your loved one in your most intimate relationships is as important and fundamental.
And of course, we have a much greater opportunity now with the pandemic since we're not leaving as often.
It's so true, Stephen. You know, the paper reiterated again this morning that domestic violence calls are up because people are challenged to continue to be kind and patient with the people that they're living with. Sarah Lee, you had your hand up?
No, I was going to say that, and I saw a interesting something that was posted on an email that came, you know, all these jokes and everything. They're trying to make light of the situation and showing this woman at her computer working very hard. And on the wall behind her, she's got the kid duct taped to the wall.
Yeah, Merle?
Yeah, so we can joke about it, but there's an agency that's part of Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles that they were talking on a social action network last week saying the biggest things or the most difficult things that they're dealing with right now in this agency with helping families in the pandemic is abuse in the household because they're all together and parents can't work and kids can't get their schoolwork done, and it's becoming very difficult and very hard to manage because they can't be in contact with these people.
Yeah.
But it's real.
Oh, yeah.
I'm putting up in the chat a book that's very much of a favorite of mine. It's a big, thick volume by Yitzhak Buxbaum called Jewish Spiritual Practices. And what's wonderful about this book is it's talking about Jewish spiritual practices in the context of everyday life. So it's sort of a corollary of, you know, the other book I've mentioned to you many times is Leonard Felder's 7 Prayers That Can Change Your Life. Felder is a much slimmer volume and focusing just on 7 specific prayers. But Buxbaum has everything from, you know, how you get dressed and how you go to the bathroom and how you prepare for and eat a meal. And he compiles classic Jewish sources as to how we can elevate those moments and those behaviors in our lives. So if that's something that interests you, I highly recommend that book. We have a new initiative just coming up that we've been talking about this week. So I am neither vegan nor a vegetarian. I was a vegetarian for quite a few years. My mom is down there. Hi, Mom. And she can attest to that. But I've been a carnivore for certainly an equal number of years. But we know that, and we'll see again when we study Genesis in just a few weeks, that vegetarianism is clearly the Torah's ideal. And now we have many people in our community who are interested in the vegan lifestyle. And so we're going to be having, probably in the next month or so, Nona Siegel is spearheading with Christina Perlman an initiative to have a virtual vegan meal once a month for those who are interested in exploring that and learning more about what's entailed and how can we continue to have our Jewish holidays are so focused on food. How can we have meals that will be recognizable as Jewish holiday meals that are also vegan? So just in case that's interesting to folks, you should know that's coming up. Let's see, verse 16. And if anyone consecrates to the Lord any land that he holds. So this is the same theme. We're donating animals, we're donating houses, now we're donating land. Its assessment shall be in accordance with its seeds requirements. 50 shekels of silver to a homer of barley seeds. So this is a little different standard. Here now there's an objective standard about, you know, how much agriculturally this land can produce. And I had also copied for you from Baruch Levine's commentary, page 196, where he referenced this verse. Anybody happen to have that there?
I have it.
Willa, please, would you read that for us on verse 16? Its assessment shall be in accordance with the seed requirement.
Wait a minute.
It's
What
page,
I have on page 196. Oh, yes, I see.
Okay.
Its assessment shall be in accordance with its seed requirement. The method of delineating plots of arable land by reference to the quantity of seed required in the planting is common to many ancient Near Eastern societies. The formula used here, Dereh Homer, a homer of seed, means an area to be sown with a homer of seed. The term homer from homor refers to an ass, mule, but the Hebrew term and its cognates in Akkadian and Ugaritic designates a dry measure equal to the normal load of an ass. Estimates of its bulk vary from 3.8 to 6.5 bushels. According to Ezekiel 45, verse 11, the most extensive catalog of weights and measures preserved in the Bible, a homer equals 10 ephahs. It was equivalent to the kur.
so, and I think James had shared with us
Yes.
a table of weights and
Measures last week.
yeah. So, David?
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that gets me all curious, and I did some research on this already. At Neot Kedim, the Biblical Living Museum, they have a couple of measuring devices from that time period. Now, the one thing that you could be certain about was eggs, so that the measuring for the barley was based on a certain number of eggs, which works out to either 220 liters of eggs or dry weight. And what's so funny is there is Palestinian barley and there's Egyptian barley, which give different measures because they have different sized grains. So one's 220, one's 230. But it's basically based on how many eggs it would take to make one smaller measurement, and then how many more eggs it would take to make the larger measurement. And that's way the merchants could identify exactly what was one homer of barley and be consistent. And the quality control was handled by either the king or the temples, because they were considered to be nonpartisan in this, rather than the merchants.
So eggs were considered to be uniform in size?
More or less, they were considered a uniform.
That they would average out
Yeah.
in shape and size with a large volume of eggs would average out.
Yeah, so they use so many eggs for one size, and they build it up to make a certain size, and so many certain sizes would make up a homer of barley. And I thought it was quite clever because I liked studying the ecology of that time period, eggs, measurements of wine, measurements of oils. How do they keep a uniform measurement so one merchant from one part of the world could say, I'm buying or selling a known quantity? And they had devices that they'd fill up and drain out, and these devices
were certified to have a known quantity. And so merchants could be say this was a regulated marketplace.
And we know that there is a mitzvah in the Torah to have accurate weights and measures because of the possibility of fraud and inexactitude. It's a measure of our own honesty that we have honest weights and measures. And as that halacha comes into the Talmud, the requirement is that you have to clean your scale every time you weigh or measure something, because there could be some residue there that would impact the exactness of the measure.
So that leads me to my question, and this is one maybe you could answer offline. When we're talking about the time period of the Second Temple and the yelling of money changers, were money changers part of the temple, or were they independents that the priest would go to and say, what is the value of this, so that they had somebody to ask for the value, or was it the priests all knew what the value of everything was and handled that?
So I can't say with historical accuracy, but it would seem to me, based on what we're reading in the Torah, that the priests had a good idea of the valuation, and therefore the valuations were known, so that if people outside the temple, what would happen is you're making a pilgrimage from northern Israel and traveling many days, and you have to bring certain animals for a sacrifice, for a specific holiday. You're not going to travel with those animals. You'll travel with money. And then when you get to the temple, there has to be some mechanism by which you exchange that money for the animal that you need for your sacrifice.
Okay.
Good. So that was the Homer. So we're up to verse 17. Let's go 17 to 21. Who's going to read for us?
I'll do that. If he consecrates his land as of the Jubilee year, its assessment stands. But if he consecrates his land after the Jubilee, the priest shall compute the price according to the years that are left until the Jubilee year, and its assessment shall be so reduced. And if he who consecrates the land wishes to redeem it, he must add 1/5 to the sum at which it was assessed, and it shall pass to him. But if he does not redeem the land, and the land is sold to another, it shall no longer be redeemable. When it is released in the Jubilee, the land shall be holy to the Lord as land prescribed. It becomes the priest's holding.
So does this make sense to everyone from what we've studied of the Jubilee? So every 50 years, the land's going to revert to its owner. So clearly that impacts the valuation of that piece of property. You know, how long is it available? If it's the year of the Jubilee, that's a big difference than the year after the Jubilee, where now the land can be held for another 49 years. Yeah, Barry Singer?
Well,
it was verse 20 that kind of got a little confusing. But if he does not redeem the field, or if he had sold the field to another man, if it was already pledged, donated, or whatever, how could it be sold? How could it be sold to someone else?
Barry Kipnis.
Because at the next Jubilee, it's redeemable by the then owner. So if you sell me your land 10 years into the Jubilee, or 40 years before the next Jubilee, 40 years hence, I'll have the right to redeem the land. But I referred to this years ago as the CPA provisions of Leviticus, because somebody had to compute the present value of a future amount, and it makes a lot of sense from an economic point of view, because land is always redeemable, even if it's been pledged. It's not pledged perpetually. It always has to be returned to some owner at the next Jubilee. I believe wherever I state that sort of accurately, I don't know.
Yeah,
Forget the CPA part, that's okay.
yes, it's always good to have a CPA weighing in, no pun intended.
Oh,
So again, oh yes, Marcy, and another accountant.
Well, not exactly. Now, my question on verse 20, I read it that the one who gave the land didn't redeem it, but it says if it's sold to another, I thought then that the priest would have sold it to another and then the priest gets it back.
So you have Levine's commentary there because conveniently we're looking at pages 196 and 197. So if we look at, we just read there, I think Willa just read for us there. So you all should still have that right in front of you. Here's what he has to say. The formulation is ambiguous. So if we're confused, we're right up there with the premier scholar of this text. It could not mean that the donor sold the land after he consecrated it, or such a sale would not be binding. The sense must be, therefore, that the priesthood sold the land when it became apparent that its donor did not intend to redeem it. Once this occurred, the donor lost his right to redeem it ever, according to Rashi and Rambam.
Yeah, that's sort of how I thought it meant, kind of.
Right. It's I'm thinking about the book of Ruth, and Boaz wants to marry Ruth, and there's another relative who is a closer relative who would have the first right to marry her and to redeem her in a way. And so Boaz goes to that individual and says, you need to give up your right to marry Ruth in order for me to marry her. And then, once she goes to Boaz, that's it. He has given up his rights. And not to make the parallel between the woman and the land, but it's the same concept in another arena that may be more familiar, where you have the first right of refusal, but once you give up that right, it's gone. And let's look at what Levine says as we wrap up that little section about when it is released in the Jubilee, the land shall be holy to the Lord as land proscribed. So if you have it in front of you, I circled the 21. Right. If the donor failed to redeem the land prior to the next Jubilee, I gave it away. The time passes. Now it's the next Jubilee coming up, and I've never redeemed the land. The initial consecration is considered permanently binding, and the land remains the property of the sanctuary forever. It is holy to the Lord. At the time of the next Jubilee, the sanctuary would be the legal owner. The status of such land is compared to that of Cherem land that could never be redeemed. This status is explained in the comment to verses 28 and 29 coming up. In this way, the sanctuary enjoyed a special privilege. In all other cases, according to chapter 25, which we already read, sales of achuzah land were never to be final, whereas unredeemed consecrations were. So this is an exception to the rule, a special privilege of the sanctuary and the priests, that they can keep land, which I guess could lead to the priesthood and the sanctuary really acquiring significant amounts of property. Normally, it was guaranteed that land would revert to the original owner at the Jubilee, even if he lacked the means to buy back his land. The legislation of chapter 27 is complex in this regard, as we're seeing. On the one hand, it utilized the Jubilee law in computing the value of the land. On the other hand, the privilege of the sanctuary overrode the rights of the original owner. So, this could be the foundation of how the church got to be the wealthiest landholder in the Middle Ages.
Right.
Barry.
Yeah, just struck me how people who lived or owned land near the sanctuary at the time, near the temple or whatever, would be under extreme pressure to make donations and to not redeem it so that it would grow contiguous to the original site. So there must have been a lot of community/political pressure to have that happen.
I don't know. David?
When it says return to the original owners, are you saying that the person who pledged it is the original owner, or is that land that was given to that specific tribe and they are the original owners?
Right.
Yeah, no, the original owner, I believe, is the family group within the tribe that has it. If your family has been on this land and that's your property within the tribe of Zvulun, you pledge that land to the sanctuary, I don't see anywhere where it's saying somebody else from the tribe of Zvulun can redeem that land to bring it back within the tribal holdings.
Yeah, it would strike me as that tribal holdings could be redivided among other members of that tribe. And I think maybe because they are the original ones who get that land, they would have first call as to maybe offer the redemption so that they could redivide it among their families.
It doesn't say that, but it makes sense that somebody else from the tribe might approach you and say, you know, we as a tribal community don't want to have our holdings diminished. If you don't want to redeem that land, you know, can we, in your name, redeem the land? I mean, I could see a lot of that kind of negotiating going on.
And the temple might agree for a percentage, a 20% or 1/5.
20% seems to be the going rate. You can get anything for 20%.
I thought the ultimate owner of the land was the Lord, right?
Right.
So if the temple is destroyed and not rebuilt, where does it goes
Oh yeah,
back?
well, all of those goods, you know, went to the Romans, who were the ones who destroyed the temple. And don't they still have some? I haven't been to Rome, but my understanding is that you go to Rome, you can still see some of the things that were taken from the temple at that time. Lisa?
In Rome is the Arch of Titus.
Right.
And you see there a depiction of some of the things that were taken from the temple.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, the Arch of Titus.
And to the north of the Arch of Titus is the Arch of the CPAs, and they're still figuring the values then and today of everything taken.
The Arch. That's the Arch, the Triumph CPA, yes.
Good. All right, verse 22. If he consecrates to the Lord land that he had purchased, which is not land of his holding, here you go. The priest shall compute for him the proportionate assessment up to the Jubilee year, and he shall pay the assessment as of that day, a sacred donation to the Lord. In the Jubilee year, the land shall revert to him from whom it was bought, whose holding the land is. All assessments shall be by the sanctuary weight, the shekel being 20 gerahs. A firstling of animals, however, which as a firstling is the Lord's, cannot be consecrated by anybody, whether ox or sheep. It is the Lord's. So you remember that the firstborn of every animal was required to be donated. So you couldn't double dip, as it were, and say, oh, well, look, I'm graciously donating this firstborn animal. It already belongs to the priest. Just as, by the way, a firstborn son, in theory, belongs to the temple. And that is why we have a practice even today of pidyon haben, redeeming the son. And anybody ever participated in a pidyon haben?
I did for Joel.
Yeah, can you tell us about it, Becca?
I don't know. Joel's 46. Can't say I remember it real clearly. That's as much as I've got.
So it's only if you have a firstborn male. So if the firstborn child is female, as would be the case in my family, then that's it. So if the second child, my mom had me first, then she had a boy. No pidyon haben required because my brother was not the firstborn.
I remember doing it 50 years ago, but it was another big party after son's bris when he was on the 8th day. That's all I remember. That
yeah, it's another big party. Mom, Sandy, did you?
A Kohen doesn't have to be redeemed, does it? If a person is a Kohen?
No, because they already belong to the temple.
What about a Levi?
But no, no dispensation for the Levi. Sorry, but the Kohen participates in as the pidyon haben is practiced today. Typically, we invite someone who defines themselves as a Kohen, and an exchange happens. Usually, it's like $5 silver. And the parents come and the Kohen come, and as somebody said, Matthew, was it this big excuse for a party and a gathering when the kid is 30 days old, and the parents give the Kohen the 5 coins in exchange for being able to keep their son, and they recite a specific liturgical formula about that. And I saw a cartoon one time where the parents actually were saying to the Kohen, actually, we don't want to redeem him. Why don't you hold on to him until he's potty trained?
I like that.
But the pidyon haben is still practiced today. This idea that the firstborn belongs to God. Matthew, are you raising your hand? You just working something?
Say was what I remember was in honor of my grandfather. We gave $5 silver from 1880, the year of his birth.
Oh wow!
And apparently, he died after my bar mitzvah. Apparently that was the tradition. You went back and gave from the grandfather's date of birth. You found old silver dollars and redeemed. That was the tradition. But I have not thought about that. My son is now 50, so it's been at least 50 years since I thought about that.
There you go. So it's not something that you hear about much in the non-Orthodox community. Pidyon haben.
But you know what? When this happened for us, we lived, Joel was born in Dayton, Ohio. And there was a small but solid Jewish community there. And in order for Joel to have a bris, we had to contact the Orthodox community to find a moil. And they really are the ones that guided us through the bris and then the pidyon haben. We just, they told us what we needed to do and we did it.
There you go.
Okay, on the pidyon haben, for the firstborn of the first wife or firstborn of the second wife? That's a valid question because
absolutely, it's the firstborn of the mother. And by the way, if the woman had a miscarriage after a certain time frame, and I'm not 100% sure what that is, if it's 40 days or what it is, and so she miscarries and then has another child, that is not considered to be the firstborn.
So,
and I don't think that you do a pidyon haben if the child is born by cesarean section. I'm pretty confident about that.
Joel was a cesarean, and they did the pidyon haben.
Really,
that's 46 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so the phrase is Peter Rechem, the one who opens the womb. So my understanding, Becca, and maybe it needs a little further research, is that traditionally you wouldn't be required to do a pidyon haben for a cesarean because it was not the one who opened the womb in the way that the rabbis define that.
Interesting. I'm going back to Dayton and get my $5 back.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. With interest. With interest.
I bet those
With
silver
interest.
dollars are worth a lot more now, but I'm gonna make a note to look that up about the Pidyon Haben in the case of a cesarean. Okay.
Why was that rule there?
What's that?
Why do you think that rule was put in place?
So if you look in the chat, you see that phrase I put pet.
Yeah, Pidyon Haben, yeah.
But under it, peter rechem, the child that you are redeeming is the one who opened the womb, and if the child is just lifted out of the woman's body as in a cesarean, then they are not. This was my understanding. They are not considered to have opened the womb in the.
Wow.
Well, let me triple check it.
Speaking as the person that had the cesarean, boy, I sure felt like that womb was open.
Yeah. No kidding. All right, so that's the firstborn. So firstborn of animals. So with verse 26 was about animals that are eligible for sacrifice. 27. But if it is of impure animals, it may be ransomed as its assessment with 1/5 added. If it is not redeemed, it shall be sold at its assessment. So if it's an animal that is not eligible for sacrifice, then the firstborn does not go to God. So you do get credit if you make that donation. It is how I read the text. But of all that anyone owns, be it man or beast or land of his holding, so this is kind of a summary statement now of everything we've been reading, nothing that he has proscribed for the Lord may be sold or redeemed. Every proscribed thing is totally consecrated to the Lord. So if you, by proscribed there, they mean you've already dedicated it. So again, it's that idea of double dipping. If you said, I'm pledging this to God, then that's it. So what is this concept of proscription? We have two different sources that we're going to take a look at about what does it mean, proscription. The word here is, let's see if it, I was worried that the computer was going to correct it. Cherem. So it's the verbal form of cherem. So we've seen this idea of cherem before with people, that the punishment for certain halachic violations is that you are put into cherem, which is kind of you're shunned, means that you're punished, but the punishment is in God's hands. It's not a punishment that's inflicted by human hands. So you're not going to pay a fine. You are not going to be put to death. You're not going to be subject to lashes, but you are punished by being put in this amorphous state of cherem. So I think I copied for you, still in Ravine, pages 198 and 199, what does cherem mean? And also, Lisa, I think you usually have the Jewish Study Bible. Do you have that there?
I do.
You do. Would you please look on page 279? And let's see. In the bottom of the middle column, why don't you, I don't think I made this for everybody, so why don't you read that, and then we'll look at the one that everybody else already has too. So you see at the bottom of the page in the middle column, verses 28 to 29?
Yeah, the second restriction, prescribed things. This term is used outside of the priestly writings for those condemned to destruction, such as defeated military enemies, those guilty of idolatry, and persons who fail to comply with the terms of a communal oath, the so-called ban, requiring all to do or die. It refers also to the spoils confiscated from those so condemned, consisting of animals which were also destroyed, and inanimate objects which were probably reserved for the sanctuary. Such items are off limits, and their taboo nature is contagious. You want me to go on?
Yeah, read all the way to 28.
Okay. Further, this destruction or confiscation of spoils is said to be for the Lord. This indicates that the obligation to condemn, destroy, and despoil is a divinely sanctioned one, and implies that the destroyed persons and animals are, like the silver and gold confiscated for the sanctuary, a form of offering to God. This passage seems to mean another type of harem, the prescribing by an individual rather than by the community or God of an object by pledging that no use would ever be made of it and that it would become permanent property of the Lord with no option to sell, redeem, or exchange.
Okay, good. Thank you. And we'll continue in Levine on page 198 with a little bit more understanding of what this cherem is all about. But of all that anyone owns, nothing that he has proscribed for the Lord may be sold or redeemed. In the comment to verse 21, it is noted that an achuzah consecrated to the sanctuary, a piece of land, but not redeemed prior to the next Jubilee year, acquired the status of cherem, proscribed property. This verse is the actual statement on the legal status of land and other property that is proscribed. Verse 29 gives the law regarding a person condemned under the cherem, so we haven't read that yet. The verb chet resh mem means to set apart, denote, or restrict, and in biblical Hebrew seems always to have a negative, prohibitive connotation. It describes what is to be avoided, destroyed, or forbidden. Its cognates in certain other Semitic languages can connote the positive aspects of holiness as well as the negative. So it's interesting, as the term comes into Hebrew usage, it's only negative, but that idea of cherem can be positive or negative in some of those other Middle Eastern, ancient Near Eastern languages that we've been studying. To designate something as cherem may mean either that it is to be destroyed completely or that it is to be reserved exclusively for specific purposes associated with the sanctuary. You know, if you think about what it took to physically produce these sorts of items in the ancient world, with no electricity, with the limited technology that they have, to take something that had useful value and destroy it, I mean, that was really a tremendous sacrifice. The institution of the cherem was variously interpreted in biblical Israel. Historically, it was associated with war, so that makes sense. The spoils of war, you wouldn't want to keep those things around because they would just be a reminder of a very negative occurrence. But on the other hand, you would think that at least you could keep those things and repurpose them, you know, melt the metal down and make it into something else. It had been a very ancient pre-Israelite practice to donate the spoils of war to gods, including conquered cities and territories. At times, this involved killing off the army of the enemy and even a population that refused to surrender. This practice is known from Mari, a town in Syria, from documents dating to the 18th century BCE. It was also operative among some of Israel's contemporary neighbors. King Mesha of Moab, mentioned in 2 Kings 3:4 as a contemporary of Ahav, king of northern Israel, in the 9th century BCE, records in his royal inscription that he proscribed conquered towns to Chemosh, the national god of the Moabites. In biblical law, the institution of the cherem is carried out into the context of juridical punishment, where the penalty for worshiping other gods is death. Exodus 22:19 ordains that any person who offers sacrifice to another god is to be proscribed, that is to say, condemned to death. A similar punishment is ordained for the town whose inhabitants collectively participate in the worship of other gods. Whereas these precedents explain verse 29, which concerns a condemned man, there remains a serious difficulty with respect to verse 28, which is the verse we're studying here. From what we know of the cherem, it is an imposed condition. One would not speak of voluntarily proscribing a field. Nor did this difficulty go unnoticed by the rabbinic sages and the medieval commentators. Two related explanations are given. First, Verse 28 may be speaking of a man who swore to devote his property. Or second, it may be speaking of one who took an oath in another matter, swearing that if he failed to uphold that oath, his property would be forfeit as cherem. In either case, the oath once taken made of the act of devotion a binding obligation. It was no longer a voluntary act. And thus, why Jewish tradition so much encourages us not to make vows. Because the words have power, they are meaningful, they take on a life of their own after they leave our mouths, and you can't take them back. And of course, that has great implications for us as well when we think about gossip and the harm that we cause by words in general. On this basis, one could translate verse 28 as follows. But anything that a man swears to devote as proscribed property to the Lord, asher yacharim, so there's the cherem. In late Second Temple times, this was a common practice. One would state, hare alai becherem, I owe this under penalty of proscription. Such oaths were called charamim because it was stipulated that the penalty for failure to uphold the oath was the proscription or confiscation of one's property by the temple. So this begs the question, in the Kol Nidre prayer, do we encounter this verb? Kol Nidre v'esare v'charameh. Yes. So this type of an oath is, if you look at Kol Nidre, there's like, I don't know exactly how many, but at least half a dozen, maybe more, synonyms for oaths, types of oaths that one might make. So Kol Nidre, a neder is a vow. V'esare, v'charameh, v'konameh, v'chinuye, v'kinuseh. They're all synonyms, and cherem is in there. So how about that? Based on the limited information available concerning the cherem in biblical times, this interpretation is perhaps the closest we can come to resolving the difficulty in verse 28, but it is far from adequate. One has the impression that there is a background to this law that is unknown to us, since it diverges decidedly from the norms applicable to the institute of the cherem as they are known from other biblical sources. So it's comforting to know that it's objectively confusing. Several additional notes on verse 28. The man whom one proscribes is undoubtedly a non-Israelite slave who is considered the property of his owner. And in verse 21, Sedeh HaCherem would mean a field that has acquired the status of cherem. Such property, according to verse 28, may not be redeemed by the one who devoted it, nor may the sanctuary ever sell it, although it probably could use the revenue from it. So there we go. So we're just about out of time. So what I'm going to ask you to do is reflect on what we've just read. We're going to pick up next week with verses 29 through 34. And I think those will not take the full hour of our time. So I would also invite those of you who have been with us on this Leviticus journey to think about what some of the big takeaways are from the book of Leviticus. You know more about Leviticus than 99% of the Jewish world. Most people, I think Sherry sent me an email. What did you say, Sherry? Like, now you get why in the Hebrew school they didn't teach you Leviticus.
That's right. They skipped right over it.
Skipped right over it, which is what this group did in its initial study. So, let's take some time after we complete Leviticus next week to think about, okay, what are we taking away? And Steve asked in a private message, when do we start again? He missed what we said. So Steve, we're going to take 2 weeks off, and I'll resend that email when I send the recording of this week's session with what the schedule is. So we're going to take 2 weeks off, not that we might not meet, but we're not going to study text. We may meet just to catch up and kibitz. And then August 23rd is the big launch date for Genesis. The major reason for doing that is to give us some time to let folks know, because I think that there is maybe a more broad interest in Genesis than there was in Leviticus. So we want to have some time to get the word out to our larger community that if they've been interested in Torah study, this might be a good time to join us. So again, if you have particular individuals that you think might be intrigued by Torah study, feel free to extend a personal invitation to them to begin with us on August 23rd. We're 1 minute over time. Any final thoughts or comments? Oseh shalom b'mrama.
Uyaseh shalom. Aleinu v'yol kol Yisrael. B'imru. Amen.
All right, Shavua Tov, everyone. Nice to see you.